You never got involved with BSD, like FreeBSD or OpenBSD?
Personally, no. I have been an on again, off again Mac user, and so Mac, Darwin, the Mac OS is based on BSD. I am a huge pfSense fanboy. I use pfSense for my own, so that was to me is a bit of an introduction into BSD. And one of the things that we invented a couple of years ago that's really matured is we have this thing called the Minion. I mean, I know this is going to be an audio record. I'll show you this guy right here. So this is a Pi 4, and the idea is you can install an image which has the OpenNMS Minion on this Pi 4. You can connect it to your network, and then using only having the device on your network talking out, it can talk to a remote OpenNMS, and it can manage your network. It can do pretty much everything you could do if you installed OpenNMS on your network, but remotely. And we build this on Ubuntu Core, so it's immutable, so that you could unplug it and plug it back in, and it'll start working. It's like our little IoT device. Well, it turns out that you can install the Minion software on a lot of things. You can install it natively on Linux. You can install it in a Docker container. You can install it on BSD and pfSense. So you can actually, I don't think that was more experimental. I don't think we actually have a supported version of that. But it was kind of cool to go to my pfSense router and be able to install a Minion directly onto the pfSense router. And I was doing some work for a government transportation agency. I try to. I'd love to brag about our customers, but I also protect their privacy. But so one of these large states in the United States, their Department of Transportation had us come do some OpenNMS training, and on the last day, it turned out we were talking. They needed to monitor those signs. I don't know if they have them in Madrid, but if you're driving down the motorway, there'll be a sign that says, there's an accident ahead or estimated time to whatever, these little digital signs. And of course, they're all proprietary software, but it turned out that the controller for those signs ran Debian. At the heart of this machine was Debian, and Debian used like the 192.168 network to talk to all the signs. And so this little box would often control like 100, 200 signs. Well, on a whim, we installed the OpenNMS Minion software on this box. I mean, it ran Debian. It wasn't a very powerful box, so it took about 20 minutes to get it downloaded and installed. But because the Minion provides a view into the network from the point of view of the Minion, it was able to monitor these signs. And for the first time in the history of them using these signs, they could monitor them. They could tell if there was an error, if they were unreachable or anything like that, because the Minion allowed them visibility into that part of the network. Um, and so that to me is always is just a really cool feature of OpenNMS moving forward.
Actually, I already started to think about this because I might be able to use it at a location. At my job, we have a issue. We have an issue that one of our offices uh, is connected through VPN, and if I want to monitor, what I want to do is, obviously I don't want to put an OpenNMS server, let's say, inside the same network, because I want to know if the whole network is down. Let's say it's router of entry of point. So I could place a Minion, like you said, on inside the network, and it could VPN out to, let's say, for example, in Madrid, to the other side of the network, and tell it the server on this side if something happened over there. Without actually, I probably will steal this idea and
You
do
should.
something with
So,
it.
and the thing is, you don't even need a VPN. That's the beauty of it. As long as your OpenNMS server can be reached with a public IP address. And by default, we ship with, so for a Minion, you need 5 things. So you need a location. And that the idea behind the location is minions with multiple If you have multiple minions with the same location, they will take turns monitoring. They actually compete for the monitoring task. So if one of them goes down, it doesn't affect your monitoring. I actually have two systems in my house. I have a Synology NAS, so I have the Synology Network Access Storage Unit, which runs Linux, and it supports Docker. So I run one Minion in a Docker container on my NAS, and then I have this little Intel NUC running Debian, and I put another Minion on that running in a Docker container. And if I happen to have to reboot my NAS or reboot my NUC, they both, monitoring still happens. And so you need a location. You need two URLs. You need to be able to reach the REST API of the OpenNMS server, which you can encrypt over SSL. And you need to be able to access a message broker. By default, we use ActiveMQ. A lot of people who have a lot of messaging will use Kafka. We have a Carafe shell as well in our system, so I always mix it up. But Kafka. So you can set up a Kafka cluster if you want to. But the simplest thing to do is set up OpenNMS to run over SSL, or front it. What I do in my network is I use a mod proxy on Apache. So I have an Apache server which supports SSL. I use Let's Encrypt, which everyone should use. So download Let's Encrypt, run certbot, get your thing set up, and then it's 4 lines to add mod proxy to point to your OpenMS server. And then you can actually take a certificate and assign it to your ActiveMQ server as well, which runs on port 61616. And then the last two things you need are a username and password to authenticate to those things. So you've got your SSL encrypted OpenNMS login, your SSL encrypted access to ActiveMQ, and then you just stick these little boxes out, or a Docker container or a VM or a piece of hardware in the network. It reaches out through the firewall. You don't have to VPN in because you're not doing anything in. And what will happen is the Minion or minions, they will reach out to the OpenMS server and say, do you have any, they'll connect to the message broker and say, do you have any work for me? And there's different topics. So you have all these different topics sitting there. So it'll go to the topic for its location and say, is there any work for me? And it's like, oh yeah, I need you to do this data collection, or I need you to do this monitoring, or I need you to do something else like that. And so they compete. So if you had two minions, they would compete. They would say, hey, I want work. Hey, I want work. Hey, I want work. And if one goes down, the one that's still working does all the work. It was funny. We had in our early days, we had a support ticket open that said, OpenNMS is telling me that my Exchange server is down 50% of the time. And we know what's up. I mean, if Exchange went down, we would know it, what's going on. And it turned out they had two minions at their location, but one of them was blocked from reaching the Exchange server for some reason. The firewall blocked it. So half the time, Minion A would monitor it, and it worked fine. Yeah, I can reach it. It's up. And then when Minion B got that job, it would say, no, I can't reach it. It's down. And so it kind of validated our set. Once they fixed the firewall, well, everything was up and running just fine. But the beauty of it is you don't have to have VPNs or anything, unless you can't, for whatever reason, you can't expose your OpenNMS to an interface that the remote device, the Minion, can reach. In that case, yeah, you would have to have some kind of VPN.
Yeah, the reason behind is we try to connect back to this office always somehow encrypted, and we use VPN for that. So we try to keep this secure. And yeah, I definitely will steal this idea. I like
It's
this
a good idea.
Minion thing a lot. And myself, I'm a QNAP person. I do
Okay.
like Synology as well. No problem. I just don't have a Synology box because I cannot afford. So don't think that I
I
think bad of Synology or something.
I have a good friend named Ben Reed he's probably forgotten more about computers than I'll ever know. And in many cases, I just follow his lead. And he was a big fan. I mean, Synology kind of dances that line between open source and closed source, because their software, they run a lot of proprietary software on their machine, but because it's Linux based, you can also run a lot of free software on it. And I pay them, but I pay them for their hardware, and what they give me in exchange is something that's easy. I get the pointy clicky bit. If I want to install Docker, I go to port 5000 on my NAS, and I say, Let's go to the software store. Oh, I want Docker, and click install, and it installs. I mean, had I had someone in my life who was a big QNAP user, um, who could, help steward me through um, setting it up and everything like that, I probably would have done so. But here's another, I'm willing to pay someone to make my life a little simpler. Um, the caveat with that is you want to make sure that they do make your life simpler. Like I love the simplicity of Apple products until they don't work the way you want them to, and then you have like no recourse. It's like if something stops working, it's like, what do I do now? I mean, I guess I go and start searching on the internet for a solution. Whereas with open source, when something's not working, I immediately go to varlog. Log into this or go to varlog and start looking at the logs, and 9 times out of 10 there will be a log there that says, oh, this driver quit, or oh, I'm having problems doing this, and you go fix it and your problem's fixed. And the other thing I love about open source, go ahead, just one last thought, is the thing I like about open source is that I learn how things work. For the longest time, I ran an open source project on my phone, on my Android phone. It was a project called Copperhead OS, which ran into some issues when they tried to do a split model. But um, I learned a lot about how Android works. Whereas if I'm using an iPhone, I have no idea how an iPhone works. Sorry, I interrupted.
Actually,
I do that.
no, no, sorry, sorry. Indeed, of course, when you can look at the code, like we said in the during this course, when you can look at and see how it works, it does help, and it does make in the end everyone prosper. And I wanted to refer back just for 1 second when you mentioned. I forgot to comment on that one. When you mentioned that client of yours who said, "Oh, I need some piece of function in OpenNMS," and but I don't want you to put it back to the code. Let's use that terminology because I don't want anyone else to to have access to this feature. The thing is that because I after that's how and why I asked you about BSD, because actually FreeBSD works on the premise that uh, you have to agree that whatever they do for one client, it's going to go back to the main code base, because that's how in the end everyone benefits. Because maybe imagine you paid $1,000 for that piece of feature, but the other guy down the road paid 2,000 for some other feature, and maybe it's good for you as well. So in the end, we all put together our money in that big bowl, and individually we would not be able to afford. And I think if that customer of yours would understand that actually it's his contribution will be tomorrow someone else's benefit, or vice versa, someone else's contribution will be his
Yeah.
benefit. In the end, maybe he gets 10 times the amount he would put in if we're looking at the raw numbers only. Regarding Apple computers, I do use myself. I have some laptops and whatnot. Most probably the answer what you get with Apple each time you run into an issue, what I wanted to tell you, nearly interrupting you, was that most of the answer they give you is that, oh, you're not supposed to do that, and somehow it's just not good enough for me for the price I pay. We had that issue many times on my wife's phone. I'm unable to switch her to Android. And we had that issue that for example, a piece of application which is doing supposed to do call filtering so you don't get spam calls. These known spam list calls, you don't get them. And
Right.
iPhone says, oh no, because we don't let you access this feature in the phone for call featuring. The same piece of application on Android does it, and when you install it on iPhone, it says, okay, but the call blocking feature we cannot do, but not because we are unable, we are poor programmers, because Apple doesn't let us access the API. And I'm sorry, it's just not good enough when the device costs the same amount of thousands of euros, what and it's not good enough. It's repeatedly happened. There was another piece of application which directly closed. It said, oh no, we don't agree with this piece of application. We don't want you to use it. And you say, yeah, but that's my phone. So yeah, Apple is a tricky one down there. The hardware, the
Yeah.
design is really nice. I'm not saying it's nice.
So that's it's really interesting that you've raised time. I don't know. I will literally talk your ear off. So just be aware that if you need to interrupt me, just go ahead and interrupt me. Um, but you ran into an issue that really um, kind of hits my one of my issues with open source is we really missed the boat when it came to mobile. There was a time in my life where pretty much every piece of technology I used, every piece of software I used was open source. I mean, I ran Linux on my machines. I had, my router was Linux or was pfSense. I used Kodi to record all my TV shows and to manage my media library. Just everything was open source. But then I got to my phone, and your choices are iPhone or Android. And the problem I have with I have lots of problems with iPhones because we actually have an app. It's called OpenNMS Compass that runs on the iPhone that allows you to connect to your OpenNMS instance and manage reports and alerts and things like that. It's really cool. When we first started with Open with the app, um, I couldn't I actually couldn't get it. Like the hoops I had to jump through to get my developer key so I could actually put software on my own phone. It was so hard that I paid Apple for my own app just so I could just download it out of the store. So Apple got its 30. I forget, it was like a buck. I think it's Compass is free now, but I think we charged like a buck or $5 back in the day. And so Apple got its little chunk of my money just because it was easier. But then on Android, modern Android is almost unusable without Google. And Google to me right now is just not a friendly place. Like when they introduced I was sitting there. This is kind of a rude story, but I was sitting on the toilet playing with my Android phone, and I was going through just playing with some menus. I was having some issues, so I was wasting some time playing with some menus, and I came across the page which told you all the stuff Google was collecting on you. And it was tremendous. It was like every phone call I made, every app I opened, every text I sent, and trust me, my bathroom problems were solved the moment I found that. And so I'm like, where the hell did I agree to this? And since I was basing my phone frequently, the next time I based it, I was very careful. And it goes, would you like to improve your Android experience? Well, yeah, of course I want to improve my Android. What does that entail? Oh, it entails sending every text, everything we send to you. And I was like, no, you don't get that. So I hit no. And everything kind of worked, but I'd go to maps and suddenly my most recent searches were gone. Like it used to be when I went to Google Maps and I typed in, some place that I visit often, but I can't remember how to get there. I want to check traffic. It'd go, oh, I type in the first 3 characters of the name and it would pop up. Oh yeah, that's where I want. And it wouldn't. So I had to type in the whole address again. And then I did this a couple of times and it popped up a little window and said, would you like us to remember your most recent searches? I'm like, yeah, well, turn on this thing where we track every phone call you make, every app you open. And it's like, no, I mean, you can't tell me that you can't let me use this one little thing in Maps. And at that point in time, I got very distrustful of Google. So Copperhead OS was one of the apps one of the operating systems for iPhone for Android phones that I just loved. Unfortunately, there was some politics involved. I don't want to. It's ugly. I don't want to go into that. What happened there? But Daniel McKay, one of the developers, has started this thing called Graphene OS. And Graphene OS is an Android open source project um, fork, and but he doesn't allow any Google software. Like I used to run Carbon ROM and all these other ROMs that you could install on your phone, and you could get you could install this little tiny version of Google. They had all these different levels. You could have like the full package of all the Google apps, or you could have a mini, and it went down to like nano, like pico. And so I'd install the smallest thing, which was literally the Google Store, and then you could install the Google apps you wanted. But even those often require a Google framework that allows Google unfettered access to your phone. So I'm torn. It's like one of the things I'm using an iPhone right now, but I don't like it in the sense that I don't like its closed nature. Um, but I really wish that the business models would have allowed us um, to have a much better mobile experience. I mean, there's the folks in Europe doing the E project. Um, the gentleman, his name escapes me right now. He's the one who did the Mandrake Linux. He's gone and there's an E project for a privacy focused fork, and they're based on Lineage OS, but you still have that kind of tenuous Google connection. And I'm hoping that they're successful in pretty much weaning themselves completely from Google. Um, but anyway, to get back to more, I could sit here for the next 7 hours and hold forth on OpenNMS and open source, but to get back to the customers who want to buy features, we've never lost a customer who wanted a custom feature because we wouldn't keep it exclusive. Once you explain, like you mentioned, I can remember we had a bank many years ago pay us to implement SMP version 3. We had support for version 1 and version 2, but we ended up doing version 3. Well, one of the things that we actually have a list somewhere of all of the custom development people have done. So when people ask, I show them the list and I go, look, you're paying for this one feature that benefits you directly. Here's all the stuff you got from all the other people who did. And then the second thing I point out is one of the things is that open source business is still business. There's nothing magical about using the term open source. It's still a business transaction. I'm like, suppose this feature costs 50 grand. Suppose it costs 50,000 US dollars to make this feature. If it's not worth $50,000 to you, you shouldn't do it anyway. But if it saves you 50,000, let's say it saves you $100,000 a year and it costs you 50,000, why do you care anyone else got it? You saved $50,000. You need to make these decisions as business decisions. The thing that's kept OpenNMS around for, over 20 years is that we've run it like a business. It's like, as much as I love the kind of um, community and stuff that you build around open source, I'm not kind of the kumbaya, yay, free hippie open source person. Although I do get attracted to that aspect of the culture, I'm very much in it because it makes business sense. I mean, for someone who grew up with expensive proprietary monitoring solutions from Hewlett Packard and IBM and Micromuse and Computer Associates and all these things that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars and didn't really do the job, you know, the open source solution as embodied at least in OpenNMS, it works. It makes a business decision. It's like it's cost effective, it's flexible, it's powerful. It's not free. Like you don't get a free solution. It says, but that it makes business sense, and that's what I think the open source community should focus on a lot more. Is that, hey, Mr. Business Person, this makes monetary sense for you to adopt this versus doing what you're doing now.
And those lot of advantages we mentioned, that they pick your box for free. You have enthusiasts behind it, again for free. And just because it's open source, like yourself mentioned, it doesn't mean bad quality or bad software or buggy software which doesn't work. OpenNMS just as well can protect a Fortune 500 company like SolarWinds or Nagios pretty much name your product here. And one thing I wanted to mention, and thank God I didn't forget, that another thing I find attractive in OpenNMS, that it's unique in itself. What I mean with this, that lately, I think in the last 5 years, pretty much, we all familiar. I mean, obviously you are even more familiar than myself. The big the ones which started this whole thing, and then came Nagios, and you guys OpenNMS just pretty much in the same year, or perhaps the year after, and then a few others which were really new and innovative in the sense. What I can't really understand, I know that it can be done because of it's open source, and you can take and you can fork it and do whatever you want with it. In the last 5 years, I've seen so many companies uh, sprung up from nowhere, claiming themselves as, oh, we are a new and innovative company in the monitoring solution and business. And then I go to their website, and okay, thank God they edited out the Pandora FMS logo, but in the end, it's just another fork again of let's say Nagios or Pandora or whatever open source monitoring software which is already out there, and again a company which again in all their right, they have the right to do that, because in the end they will sell the support with it, as the model implies. But how many copycats, I call them copycats because uh, how many copycats we need on the same template? And that's one thing which I really like in OpenNMS, that it's not just again another copy of someone else's idea, that it's really unique in its sense, and it has its place where it belongs, and uh, and I really respect that, I must say.
Well, thanks. You bring up a big problem with open source when it comes to business, and something when we exchange emails to set this up, it segues right into the latest controversy with Elastic. So, as you may be aware, Elastic is the company behind things like Elasticsearch and Kibana and Logstash, and very successful company. We use it. We integrate with Elasticsearch heavily if you need to use that to store a bunch of data. And they recently changed their license to make it to a license that's not OSI approved. It's not an open source license. And part of the reason was that there were companies out there offering a cloud version of Elasticsearch and monetizing it. And we worried about that. If you think about it, let's say you have a large corporate. I'm not going to name any names, but let's say you have a large corporation that does have some vested interest in open source. Say you're a 5 or 6 person team and you've created this application that's really awesome. What would happen if that big corporation said, "Oh, I'm going to suddenly put 20 developers on that." And we're going to mold it, and we're going to take that seed that you planted and we're going to mold it, and so now that the tree's growing, we're going to harvest all the fruit. Because we're huge, we're a multi-billion-dollar company, and we can just afford to throw people at it. And it is a meritocracy, but if 20 people are doing the work that used to be 5, how do you control your project? How do you keep this from going? We struggled with that in OpenNMS. I mean, again, not naming names because the company that did this doesn't exist anymore, but I was sitting there one day on our IRC channel. Remember IRC? That's how we used to communicate back in the day, IRC. And someone popped in and they were like, check out this product. And I immediately glanced at it and I said, "Oh, it's a proprietary monitoring solution. We don't care." And they go, "No, no, look at it." And I started looking at it. It was OpenNMS. I mean, it had a different GUI on it, but someone had taken the OpenNMS code. It was a long, protracted issue that we went through there. There was the Software Freedom Law Center got involved. I mean, it was messy. Um, but yeah, this person had basically taken our code. Now that was definitely a violation of the license. I mean, we were GPL version 2 back then, and they weren't abiding by the license. They weren't telling people GPL code was there. They weren't open sourcing their solutions. But we worried about someone making like a cloud version of OpenMS. I mean, one of the things, like I mentioned with the WordPress example, WordPress survives and does a really good business hosting their own open source software. So yeah, if you want to run it on your own, you can. If you want to run it in their cloud, you can. It's a great choice. What I love about it is if I'm running it on their cloud and then I decide I want to host it myself, I can. I can just export everything and run it my own instance. Well, what would happen if someone tried to offer OpenNMS as a cloud service? So rather than make that decision internally, we went to our community, specifically this Order of the Green Polo that I was telling you about, which is kind of an ad hoc steering committee, if you will. And we talked to them, and one of the people in the group suggested the Alfaro Gpl, the GPL version 3, which is it basically closes what they call the provider loophole. So if you're free to take OpenNMS and you're free to offer it as a cloud service, but the moment you do that, you have to let your customers know that it's a GPL code, and if they want a copy of it, you have to give it to them. So it kind of removes a lot of the financial, because in the case of a lot of cloud providers, they want to make changes and then they want to charge, that's their value add is the changes they made to the code, and so you can't do that with the Alfaro GPL, not legally. Um, and so that's how we addressed it. Elastic took a different path, um, which I can't say I support. But again, people are forking Elastic. So if you don't, the beauty of open source, if you don't like it, I mean, to me, a fork is a failure. It really is. I mean, if someone were to fork OpenNMS, and I believe it's been done, I believe that there's at least one project in China that was forking OpenNMS. If you abide by the license, more power to you. You have that right to fork OpenNMS. But if you're willing to do the work, I mean, dealing with open source projects at any level, I don't care if it's OpenNMS, I don't care if it's a small little project that someone just does on weekends. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to keep the code up to date. It's a lot of work to do the documentation. It's a lot of work to do that. And if you want to go do that on your own, if you want to make Bubba NMS and take OpenNMS and make it Bubba NMS and remove all of our trademarks and sell it, do your own fork, more power to you. But if you're willing to be that active in it, why don't you just join our community? Tell us what interests you, and we would love to have you contribute to OpenNMS. We're on GitHub. Just create an account, do a pull request. And then that brings us to the second part of any kind of intellectual property. The first is your license. The second is your contributors agreement. When this company that stole OpenNMS and was basically using it as a proprietary software, when we threatened a lawsuit, they basically said you didn't have standing, you didn't have a right to do the lawsuit because you don't own the copyright. When I took over OpenNMS from Oculan, I did not get the copyright to the code. Oculan was using that; they kept it. And so what ended up happening was, this other company was basically saying, if we're violating copyright, we're violating Oculan's copyright, and you don't own it, so you can't do anything. Well, I, being stubborn, Oculan ended up closing their doors in 2004. A little bit of Schadenfreude there because some friends of mine work there, but I do think it's kind of funny that they went away in 2004 and OpenNMS is still here, in 2021. But I tracked down where that intellectual property went, and I contacted the new owners, told them about the lawsuit, and as part of the deal, we made them an offer to buy the copyright from them to the original OpenNMS 1.0. Because once I left Oculan, everything I owned the copyright to all the changes I made. I just didn't own the copyright to the vast majority of the code that they owned. But we ended up, my business partner David and I, we mortgaged our houses actually and took out a big loan and we bought the intellectual property from them. Another question was, okay, now we own the copyright to everything in OpenNMS. Now, how do we move forward? What if someone wants to contribute code? How do we deal with that? I mean, a lot of things like Elastic and MySQL and these other projects would say, well, you have to assign us copyright. You have to give us this code. And my question is, this is code you wrote. I feel guilty taking it. Because that also kind of prevents you. Let's say you write a plugin for OpenNMS and then you want to write a plugin for Singa. If you contribute the code to OpenNMS and we own the copyright, you are legally prohibited from reusing bits of that code in this other project. I didn't like that. I mean, that doesn't sit with me. It goes against the very nature of open source. Well, again, a member of our community pointed out that at the time, Sun Microsystems, which is now part of Oracle, they had a contributors agreement that enabled this thing called dual copyright. And the idea was that multiple people could own copyright to a piece of code. So when you contribute code to OpenNMS, you assign us copyright, but you also keep the copyright. And people, they'll say, "Oh, well, that's never been proven in court." I'm like, look, there's a book I really like by Stephen King, and I wanted to say Daniel C. Dennett, but that's not right. Hold on one second, I got to look this up. It's called The Talisman. Have you ever heard of this book? Peter Straub. So Peter Straub and Stephen King wrote this book called The Talisman. And really cool fantasy book, very Stephen King-ish, very Peter Straub-ish. And so they own joint copyright, right? They published it as dual authors. They own joint copyright to this code. Well, Peter Straub wrote a sequel called The Dark House. but he owned the copyright to Talisman, so he was able to write a sequel without Stephen King. So to me, the legal bedrock, the legal framework for the idea of dual copyright has already been created. And I think it's very egalitarian. If you want to contribute to OpenMS, we'd love to have you. Fill out our contributors agreement, send us a pull request. We'll implement it into OpenNMS. If you want to take that same piece of code and apply it to another project, Zabbix or Asinga or something like that, feel free. We don't care. But what this allows us to do, and the only reason we really ask for this copyright is it allows us to defend the code. So if another company in the future, if we find out that there's this other company that has decided to use OpenMS in violation of the license, it's much easier for us to have standing to defend it. But it's confusing. It's funny that when we set out to say we just want to make free software for everybody, how many repercussions there are. Licensing, contributors agreements, it's funny. Anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Sorry, what I wanted to mention that I think this whole unnecessary evil part of legal mumbo jumbo around open source and yeah, mostly around the open source is just because somehow we humans just cannot understand the do no harm and the do not steal uh, commandments, or call them however you want it, because I think everything would just work on its own without any legal aid and lawyers if we could just do things without harming anyone, or do things without any malicious intent.
Yeah, it's funny. And I think part of it, the more you work in open source, I think the more open to the ideas of cooperation without kind of a quid pro quo. Um, one final story. I know we're getting along. I mean, I can talk forever, but I know you're going to want to wrap this up at some point in time. But I'll tell this story. I went to Africa a couple of years ago for the very first time. I went to a conference in Dakar, Senegal, and I love to travel. I've been to 43 countries, and I wanted to, on the way to Dakar, I was trying to find a way to get there, and I found that if I took Royal Morocco Airlines, the Moroccan airline, I could fly from New York to Casablanca, Casablanca to Dakar and back, and I could go business class for the same price of like a coach ticket on American or Delta. I was like, okay. So I'm in JFK, I'm at the airport, and I come across this guy named Tommy, and he sells airplane parts. He's Lebanese, but he lives in Miami and he sells airplane parts, and he has a lot of business. He does a lot of his African business out of Casablanca. And we hit it off, and he said, "Hey, when you land, find me at baggage claim, and I'll take you to your airport, and I'll show you around the city and all this." And so I ended up having this amazing experience. I was only in Casablanca for one night. I laid over for one night just to experience Casablanca. And I mean, he wined and dined me, took me out to the souk so I could buy a gift for my wife, and we went to this restaurant where he was like well known. It was this amazing experience. And I'm telling this to some friends of mine. And at the point I said, I met this really friendly guy named Tommy. I got interrupted, and the guy said, "Oh, he just wanted your kidneys." And it was so foreign to me, the thought that, to live a life in such fear that someone being nice to you, that there has to be this ulterior motive. That there has to, this was this great, in the top 10, my top 10 travel experiences, this night in Casablanca was easily in the top 5. And I'm like, had I been, locked into this kind of proprietary, everything has to be kept secret mode, I never would have spoken to Tommy, never would have trusted him, and never would have experienced this thing. And I think a lot of the open source culture kind of lends itself. I mean, I met you. I mean, we're both Hungarians. We came from this thing, and I've made a new friend, and we've had this time to talk, and I look forward to talking in the future. Maybe not being recorded because I can't imagine anybody else is interested in this other than the two of us. But you know, open source has given me way more value than just the software. Yeah, I get great software and I get great solutions, but I've got great friends and I've got all this stuff that came out of open source. That we were talking, before this about books that changed your life. The open source experience to me has definitely made me the person I am. I like to think I'm very open. I get to experience all these great things, and I think very positively of other people. And It's funny to come across people who don't have that luxury, who don't have that experience.
It is indeed. I completely agree that when you experience open source or use open source, it opens your eyes to first the difference between proprietary code or software versus open code and software, and suddenly you realize that it is not about money. Open doesn't mean free, which is completely fine. I would be the first one who would pay due money for a piece of software as long as it's worth that money. Don't charge me €5 for crap software because you do more harm than good, both to yourself than as well as the community. But indeed, people with that kind of mentality, like you mentioned, I tried not to laugh in the microphone, but it's so unfortunately so common to find this kind of it's not even skepticism, it's just darkness, it's like darkness
Oh yeah,
through and through that uh, like you mentioned, I mean, could someone live his or her life all the time thinking about bad or negative things? I do remember at some point I had some conversation similar uh, to this, and there the conversation went to women, and they said, yeah, because what if they will rape the person? And I was like, okay, I understand the logical fear of being assaulted, but I mean, you cannot live your life that, oh, I'm not gonna go out to the street because someone might rape me. I mean, uh,
yeah,
yeah, it's not a good way to go through life, because living in fear is not what we would need to do. There was on National Geographic, there was a quote that no, it was not on National Geographic. It was something like that: living a day like a lion is worth 1,000 times living 100 years as a mouse, or something like that. Which
yeah.
it's pretty much translates to this one, that being a bit more open. I'm not asking total openness of the world, because it's not going to happen, but sometimes a bit more open and not thinking about something like that. Oh, someone must want to do you harm. It's not how it works. Actually, yeah, we already reached 1 hour and a half of conversation. The question is that I don't know how I'm
Yeah.
gonna uh, present this. Probably I'm gonna make two episodes out of it. And just to make you sure, there is at least, to my knowledge, one black cat named Ben in Miami. He and his owner also listens to the show. One of the first ones who signed up to the Server Room show. And recently they just acquired another black cat again, uh, Bruno. So at least two cats and one human listens to the show. So yeah.
I will listen to this. Yeah, it was funny. I in a world where I've seen a lot of things come and go in the last 20 years, and you know there was a time where influence was measured by followers. And people were bragging about how many followers on Twitter they had or how many followers on Facebook they had and things like that within our industry, not necessarily. I mean, I know it was definitely worldwide as well. Um, so I used to always joke I had three followers. I have my three followers, my three listeners, my three people. And that's one of the things I love about community, in the sense that OpenNMS definitely doesn't have a community on the size of, say, the kernel, or even Elasticsearch was, someone pointed out, they had something like 1,700 contributors. I don't know. I know our number of contributors is in the hundreds, but I don't think it's as high as 1,700. But we're really devoted. We've got this. We're really active. We're really devoted toward the project, and so I'm happy with three people. I would much rather have three people who got value out of the work we did and enjoyed it, than having 3,000 people that were mainly bots. You know what I'm saying? Um, and so it is nice, like you said. And I said, I just, it amazes me that anyone would be interested in anything I have to say. And so when you're talking about your friends in Miami and their cats, we have three cats. One of them's black, but anyway, no, it's a pleasure. I love talking about stuff like this. It's just trying to keep me on track and not holding forth on random subjects is kind of difficult. I admit that.
Thank you very much for accepting this invitation. And who knows, you are very welcome to come back for part 2 and do another hour and a half whenever you want.
That's great. Let's wait a few months and then
Yeah.
see what happens in the world of open source and try it again.
Yeah.
I love it.
Let's
Take
see.
care.
I will hold you to your promise.
No problem.
Thank you very much.